Good evening all and welcome. Exes. Most people probably have some in their past. And the reason they are exes may be because they were downright insane and the source of many horrors, which is what we are about to find out tonight. I'd also like to extend a very happy birthday to Chandra Jensen. Huge happy birthday. Best wishes. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. For reference, I am a 27-year-old female, and this story takes place 10 years ago, when I was 17. I had just started university, and was excited about having a fresh, new start, since I'd always been a nerdy outcast in high school. I had never had a boyfriend before. I'd never even been on a date. So I was naive and optimistic about boys. My introverted and awkward personality hadn't magically changed since entering university. So it's safe to say that I didn't meet any interesting guys at school. One late night, I was in my room working on an assignment on my laptop when I received a request on MSN Messenger. The email address was a boy's name with some numbers. The name was clearly ethnic and likely someone of the same origin as me. Intrigued, I accepted. For the sake of the story, we'll call the boy Ken. We got chatting, and I asked him how he had gotten my email address. He dodged the question. I let it go, not thinking too much into it. This was from a time when it was normal to accept anyone and everyone as a friend on Facebook, as well as other social media platforms. As Ken and I continued to talk, I learned that he lived in my city, and apparently wasn't much older than me. As I guessed, our roots were in fact in the same country, the motherland. I asked him why he didn't have a picture of himself on his display picture, and this prompted him to suggest that we turn on our webcams because he wanted to see me too. I declined, but he insisted. Somehow he convinced me, and we both switched on our webcams. I was pleasantly surprised and somewhat relieved to see that Ken was a good-looking young guy, chatting to me from the comfort of his bedroom, seemingly very normal. Our MSN chats carried on for a few weeks. They developed into texts, and we even had a few phone calls, after I had agreed to give him my phone number. I started to develop a crush on Ken. He asked me to go out with him a few times, but I was always pretty busy with school, and our schedules weren't lining up. Finally, we found one afternoon when we were both free, and decided to schedule a lunch date. Ken had a car and had offered to pick me up from my university after I was done for the day. I was a little too dressed up for my C+ programming class, but just right for the lunch date we had planned at the local vegetarian restaurant. Stupidly, I didn't tell any of my friends where I was going or with whom because I was embarrassed about going on my very first date at almost age 18 with someone who had randomly added me on MSN. I waited outside my building when a black car with heavily tinted windows pulled up beside me. The passenger side window rolled down, and sure enough, there was Ken sitting in the driver's seat. I was happy to see that he was just as cute in person as he was on webcam. However, what I wasn't expecting was the intense smell of weed floating out the car. Not relevant, but it is part of the first impression. Admittedly, I was a bit taken aback and was concerned that he might be driving high. He unlocked the doors and motioned for me to get in, so I did without dispute. As I sat down in the passenger seat, he immediately put his hands on my thigh. I nervously shifted my leg away. "So," I started, "do you know where the restaurant is? I can guide you if you want." He smirked at me, but didn't say anything and just started driving. Okay, kinda weird. I thought maybe I was just nervous or awkward, both of which I could sympathize with, so I let it be. I was about to try my hand at a little small talk, which I'm no good at, when I noticed him heading towards the highway ramp. I started to worry, because the restaurant was not far from my campus and there was no reason for us to be getting the highway. You don't need to get the highway. The restaurant's actually really nearby. I can guide you. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear my own nervousness. Ken finally spoke for the first time since I'd gotten in the car. Thought maybe we could, go to my place instead. We can play Need for Speed and I can make you lunch. I was 17, and on my way to the house of a guy I'd just met for the first time, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going. My mind was racing. I knew that this would be an utterly stupid thing to do, and despite the clear red flags waving in my face, I decided that I didn't want to ruin our first date by rejecting his offer to make me lunch and play NFS together, which I told him I liked playing. Don't judge me. So like an idiot, I reluctantly agreed to avoid being rude. We made it to his house. It was apparently his family's home and was situated in a sort of shady neighborhood. We stepped inside, and of course no one was home except us. It was sparsely furnished and looked unkept, which struck me as pretty odd for a family home. He informed me that his Xbox was in his bedroom. I hesitated in the doorway, but he sat at the foot of his bed, in front of the TV, and patted the empty space beside him for me to have a seat. There was literally nowhere else to sit in this room, so I cautiously sat down, keeping as much distance as I could between us. I started to relax as we played NFS, and he made us PB&Js to munch on. I was about to laugh at myself for being overly paranoid when Ken did something bizarre. He got up onto the bed and sat down directly behind me, his legs on either side of me, an extremely awkward position, and tried to guide my hands on the controller. I started to ask him what he was doing, and as if this wasn't uncomfortable enough, his hands moved from the controller and slid under my shirt. That is when I really started to panic. I thought he was going to try and grope my chest, but instead, he started squeezing and massaging my belly. I was more than a little chubby back then, freshman 15 and then some, so you can imagine what that might have been like. I dropped the controller in pure shock and quickly stood up, fixing my shirt. I was at a loss for words, and he did nothing but smirk at me and tell me he liked it. I felt completely disgusted and violated. I had had enough. I lied and told him that I had a group project to work on and needed to go. He asked where I lived so that he could drop me home. Thankfully, I had the common sense to not tell him and asked him to drop me back at school instead, where I would be supposedly meeting my classmates, and he obliged. After our very uncomfortable first date, I decided I didn't want to talk to Ken anymore. I didn't block him on MSN or my phone, our only two methods of communication, but I rarely responded to his messages and I ignored all of his calls. Once he messaged me on MSN at around 11 p.m, asking me to come over and telling me that he would send a cab to bring me over to his place. Thoroughly annoyed, I responded, "What do you take me for? Why do you even think I would want to go to that?" He replied saying that it was nothing dirty and that he promised. It was just bizarre. I was disgusted and didn't even reply. He continued trying to get in touch with me for months and then suddenly vanished. I figured he'd finally gotten the point. Now, I wish the story ended here, but it doesn't. I last heard from Ken in late February. He had stopped trying to contact me shortly after Valentine's Day. In April, 2 nuclear family members and I went on a holiday to visit another relative called Annie, who was living in the Caribbean at the time. Annie, who I love dearly, was and still is a bit of an eccentric. She considers herself very spiritual and is an active member of a large, well-known spiritual organization. She is deeply connected with the motherland, more than the rest of us are, and goes back for frequent visits. While we stayed with her in the Caribbean, she told us about her most recent trip to the motherland, where she met a wealthy and well-connected local woman through the organization, who quickly became a very close friend, Connie, the con artist. During our visit, Anne introduced us to Connie virtually over Skype, because Connie lives in the motherland. We chatted to her a few times through our vacation via Skype, and got to know her a little bit. Little did we know back then that Connie, who Annie had spontaneously met halfway across the world in the motherland, would soon wreak utter havoc on our lives. Now, that's a story that I'm just not ready to tell, and perhaps may never be, because of how many lives were affected and the severity of the damage that had been inflicted. What you need to know is that Connie was an outright criminal and con artist who had been targeting our family from long before Annie, who had actually met her. Their meeting was no coincidence. Not only did she manage to steal over $100,000 from our family, but she took any peace of mind or sense of security we had with it. When we finally caught on and confronted her, she insisted that we were mistaken, but disappeared into thin air once we forced her out of our lives. You're probably wondering what on earth this has to do with the story about Ken. Well, get this. The situation with Connie lasted many months. The whole thing is kind of a blur to me now, but as we spoke to her online in April, I remember the whole ordeal lasting well into the fall. While she normally resided in the motherland, Annie had invited her to visit and stay with us, where we, my whole family and I, presently live. That's when things really took a turn for the worse. Some of the things I clearly remember, and are important to this story, were that 1, the whole time she was staying with us, she was trying to convince me to transfer schools to a very obscure school and program in the US. I don't even live in the US, and was actually getting very pushy about it. And 2, she had asked me if I was a virgin, and told me to save myself and my husband. Disturbing, I know. During this time, I was so emotionally drained and stressed that I didn't really think of anything but the situation at hand. In fact, I had stopped socializing almost entirely, and even started habitually skipping classes. I had lost contact with my high school friends, and my university friends were too new to really care, so my strange behavior and new destructive habits went unnoticed. Fast forward one day, after Connie's final disappearance in the fall, I was home with my dad when my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, and it was a number I didn't have saved, so it was showing the contact information as whatever name the phone was registered under. My heart dropped to my stomach. My phone displayed a name. The first name was a man's name, and the last name was the same last name as Connie's. I began to panic, and I ran into my bedroom to answer the call. I had no idea what to expect, and when I answered the phone, I was greeted with a familiar voice. It was Ken. I honestly thought I was going to puke when I suddenly came to a realization that he had been a part of this whole sick plot. Of course, I don't have hard evidence to prove that he was connected to Connie, but let me explain. The timing of his appearance and reappearance into my life, the last name, a fairly unique surname originating from the part of the motherland where Connie is from, and I had never known Ken's last name until then, and the fact that he contacted me out of the blue, I had no idea why or how. It was all just too bizarre to be a mere coincidence. Of course, I freaked out at Ken when he called me, and I told him that if he ever called me again, I would call the police. His response was just a weird, dry half laugh, and then he said, "Well, okay then," in the most creepy voice you can think of, and hung up. I knew in my gut that that was their last attempt to get back in touch and somehow slither their way back into mine and my family's lives. Thankfully, I never heard from Ken again after that day. A while after all of this ended, I was having a conversation with a family member who was also closely involved in all of this, about the whole ordeal, and she told me she'd sensed something extremely wrong with Connie. She was pushing to have me sent off to the US to that obscure school, and she had an unshakable feeling that Connie was involved in some sort of human trafficking scene, and that, if I left, she would never see me again. The horrifying pieces came together, and I was just too damn naive to have seen it before. The memories flooded back to me when I heard that. How Ken told me, nothing dirty I promise, when he invited me over, and how Connie was telling me to remain a virgin. As I said, I had never told a soul about Ken, nor about the weird V-card conversation with Connie. I strongly and firmly believe that Ken had been a sort of player in Connie's game, and was just there to keep me away from guys and prevent me from having a boyfriend. For those of you wondering why we never called the police on Connie nor Ken, because nothing illegal ever happened at face value. It's a bit hard to explain. I'll also mention that I tried to find Ken online many times after everything ended. I don't know why. Perhaps I felt like I wanted to expose him or call him out, and wasn't able to find a sliver of information on him. Not by the name Ken, nor by the name on the caller ID. It was as if he never existed. Also, from this incident onwards, I can't stomach a lot of these spiritual organizations. I never liked the idea to begin with, but now I've truly experienced how they can both attract the vulnerable and unsavory, who are looking for someone vulnerable to prey on. No judgments to those who are into those sort of things. It just isn't for me personally. I would like to hear what you guys think of this. Do you think my suspicions are plausible? What do you make of Ken and Annie? And to you both, I hope you rot in hell. In high school, I had a stalker. Here's the story. I was 16 and we met on Facebook. He went to a school nearby, and we decided to meet up for a movie. We had a great time together and ended up dating. First time he came to my parents' house, he had an ankle monitor on for house arrest, and wouldn't tell anyone why. Red flag number 1. And since he was a minor, we couldn't find out. My parents obviously didn't allow us to hang out, so we hung out at his house or around town at the YMCA camp. I was rebellious and naive. Things started to get weird when I noticed his family was pretty odd. One day we were doing it in his bedroom, and I saw his father looking in through the blinds. I screamed and called him out, and his dad ran off. The stalker guy told me that his dad was just into redheads and liked to watch us, so this wasn't the first time. I went to leave, and his mum was doing crack in the kitchen, so I decided it was time to break up, and this is when things got bad. He started crying and told me that he's in cancer treatment, and that's why he needs me. He doesn't have long to live. I believed him and told him we could be friends. This is when the stalking started. He switched schools to my high school, but never went to class. He would just stand outside my classroom looking inside until it was passing period. When I would leave class, he wouldn't address me. He would just follow, about 10 to 15 feet behind me to my next period, and stand outside the classroom again. I was too intimidated to say something to him, as he was 6'4" and heavy set, so I just let it happen for a few weeks. It started to progress when he would follow me home every day. He would get on the same bus as me, despite living across town, and walk 10 to 15 feet behind me all the way to my house. He would stand outside, just staring up at the window, until around the time my parents got home, and then he would just leave. Finally, I told him to piss off and leave me alone. I told him we could no longer be friends or acquaintances or anything, and to forget about me. However, that escalated things way further. I started getting about 150 calls a night. Half of them were him screaming death threats and in detail torture methods that he wanted to do to me, and the other half were him singing me love songs that he wrote on his guitar. Every time I blocked his number, he seemed to just magically get a new one and leave more messages on that. I woke up one day to see that overnight he had left me one of these dancing, singing snowmen on my porch. He had stabbed it in the head, and the knife was sticking out. He covered it in his liquid deodorant that I had previously mentioned liking the smell of, and I noticed that there was a hole where the little song recording device was. When I pressed the hand, it was not the regular Frosty the Snowman song that played. It was his voice singing eerily, "I'm gonna have you forever. I'm never gonna let you go." I was done at this point and told my parents, who contacted the school. They suspended him, but he still waited at my bus stop every day and walked to my home with me. One day he ran at me, like he was gonna tackle me. When I tensed up for the impact, he stopped and hugged me. It wasn't a regular hug, it was like he was trying to crush me. I was 5'1" and about 90 pounds at the time, and he ended up cracking one of my ribs. I cried and he started crying too before running off, and he left me a voicemail apologizing in song. This one night is the night I'll never forget, and it's the reason why we got a restraining order and my dad got a gun. I woke up one evening for no reason. I was just fully awake. I got up to go to my kitchen to get a glass of water and relax, and in the reflection on my fridge I saw movement in the backyard. I couldn't see well because it was so dark outside and so light inside, so I went to the back sliding glass door to get a better look. When I got closer, I was met with the silhouette of a 6'4" man standing just outside the door. The stalker guy was standing in my backyard under my room at 3 a.m. He was just staring at me. I yelled at my parents and got them up, but of course he was gone by the time my dad got outside. There's a patio right outside my bedroom window that goes all the way around to the ground, so it's possible he could have been on top of the patio looking directly into my bedroom window before. We got a restraining order granted shortly after, and Stalker Guy dropped out of school. I haven't seen him in person, but every 6 months-ish, he makes a new Facebook and tries to friend request me. I block and report it every time. Have you ever heard that myth that if you wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, there's likely someone looking at you? Well, maybe it's true. During college, I dated a fairly well-known and talented local musician named Tim. As horrible boyfriends tend to be in the beginning, he was a loving, attentive, charismatic, and seemingly normal partner. He made me mixtapes, cooked my favorite meals, and dedicated songs to me at open mic nights around town. I, young, foolish, naive, was deeply smitten by his mysterious, dark, and artistic allure. However, over the course of our year-long relationship, his mental health severely declined. He had the ability to appear lucid around normal and other people, but in private began suffering delusions, compulsive lying, and created art that focused on themes of murder. I was worried sick, and his condition was exhausting, but I did my best to be kind and understanding and supportive. I loved him and believed that he shouldn't have to struggle with his mental illness alone. One time he vanished without a trace for a full day. I found his apartment empty, lights on, front door wide open, and phone on his nightstand. I took a few deep breaths and called all around the city for hours, before finally discovering he had been involuntarily checked into a mental hospital. I did my best to be strong for him, seeing him every day during his supervised visitation hour and bringing him his favorite books to pass the time, and holding him as he sobbed that it was all a mistake, that he didn't belong there. It was surreal to see my gentle, intelligent, normal albeit depressed boyfriend surrounded by visibly insane long-term psych ward patients. For real, this place was like something out of a horror movie. In retrospect, none of the staff ever told me the real reason why he was there, and I was too polite and naive to ask. Our relationship ended a few months later. I found undeniable evidence that he was cheating on me, and secretly relieved, confronted him. I told him to leave my apartment and never returned. He cracked. The gentle Tim I had known and loved melted away to reveal a new persona with dead wild animal eyes that threatened to kill himself with pills unless I took him back. But I was so extremely done that I called the police. They weren't much help, but Tim left. I blocked him everywhere and never contacted him again. But he left me insane voicemails from different numbers for weeks afterwards. I was relatively unshaken, and things returned to normal. I graduated, got a sweet job in the same cool college city, and 6 months later I woke up to concerned texts from mutual friends, saying that they didn't want to freak me out, but Tim was off his meds, clearly manic, and was posting a newly written song all over social media. His best friend, who hadn't been in touch since before the breakup, sent me an apology, along with a screenshot of the lyrics. That got my attention. I don't want to read them here because they'll lead you back to his Bandcamp, but the song was pretty explicit about my rape and murder, but in a sort of cleverly disguised way. It's catchy too, the barstool. I checked his profiles myself from a friend's account, and he was posting dozens and dozens of totally insane rambling statuses, most of them about me. They flip-flopped between flowery love and prose to murder imagery. His friends were reacting with concern, but a few egged him on, probably thinking he was just venting about his ex. I decided that it would be best to continue ignoring him, but I saved screenshots just in case. A few days later, while at work, I looked up from my computer to see Tim enter into the far side of the studio, and my blood turned to ice. He was talking to my creative director. It looked cordial enough, and I saw Tim begin to casually scan the studio. I ducked down and bolted into my favorite project manager's office, slammed the door and unleashed upon her what must have been a nearly unintelligible explanation of what was happening. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak, but Nancy was amazing. She understood almost immediately, and she snuck me out of the building and drove me to her car to the police station, where I showed the officers the screenshots and filed a report. My co-workers later told me that Tim was there to inquire about the open designer position. He is not a designer. He had brought with him a portfolio and an elaboratedly fabricated work history that sounded legit. At the end of his interview, he casually asked if I still worked there. He said we used to collaborate. Oh, and he had written a song for me, and it had been picked up by local radio this morning. He asked my co-workers to let me know with warmest regards. That phrase still makes my skin crawl. He then left, found my abandoned car in the parking lot, and paced behind it until the police arrived. Unfortunately, he wasn't enough of a public menace for police to bring him in that day, but the incident helped me secure a restraining order against him. My company was amazing too. I was deeply embarrassed about my literary insane ex coming to the studio, but the CEO filed trespassing complaints against him and created an action plan to keep me safe if it happened again. Not long after, I moved to a different city, and that was that. I haven't heard from him since. But I discovered the most alarming part later. His roommate at the time, Liz, went through a similar experience with him during his breakdown, and when we compared notes much later, she said that she had seen a large axe in Tim's car the same week it had all gone down. She said that she was so worried about Tim's Facebook activity that she removed the axe and hid it from him. Tim was so angry that he completely trashed their house and never came back. And if our timelines are correct, this must have been just before he came to my workplace for his interview. When I just finished college, I was living in a one-bedroom townhouse/split, and I met a guy on Plenty of Fish at the time, and I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've really changed, but at least I'm not as ridiculous as before. Anyway, he seemed like a decent guy, was really good looking, had a great job, nice teeth, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like for them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. About a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there, I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date, we said bye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me, because of the distance to my house. I wasn't immediately scared because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway. But he didn't. My exit was coming up, so I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine, and when I pulled out the exit, I noticed he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to catch my breath and said, "Okay, screw it, I'll just go home." I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home, showered, and was getting ready to go to bed. And I started to feel dumb because, was that really him or was I overreacting? Do I ask him if he was following me? Just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination, and I decided I was going to message him and say, "Had a good time, good night." And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through my phone of a picture of my car outside my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest, and I started shaking. I didn't know what to say next, and he texts me and says, "I didn't know you lived across the street from me." I've met my neighbors, and not once have I ever met him. There's a huge apartment complex kiddie corner to my townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived. I don't know. I popped up and went to look outside, and he's there just standing there, as if he's waiting for me. I opened the door, and he asked me if he could come in, and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him I was exhausted, and I'd rather just crash out as it had been a long day. The next morning I woke up to go to work, and my windshield had been smashed. My car had been keyed, and my 2 back tires were slashed. And as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees and was like, "Oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee." So again I'm freaking out, called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, "Don't get in the car." So I called my boss and told them the situation and explained I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the whole time. When the police finally got there, the guy was acting really sus. He walked away and was acting like he was hiding on the other side of his car. I filed the report. The police basically said, "I hope you have insurance," and were on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard was the siren on the cop car turn on, and the cops scream, "Freeze, put your hands in the air and get down on your knees." I look at the cops. One of them has his gun drawn at the guy, and the dude's on the ground getting arrested. I spoke to the cop after he got into the back, and he explained he was wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shook. It took me a few days to get over the hypothetical situation that could have happened. About a week later, I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but that I'd call him when I was done. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment in another area of the city. I changed my phone number, and I hired my friend's husband and his friends to go back to my apartment and move it to their place for a month, and then move into my new place, because I was so scared this dude would follow them while moving. So that's my horror story of the first time I used plenty of fish. Against my better judgment, at the beginning of the month I got Tinder, and I matched with a few guys. One of them was called James. We ended up texting each other, and he seemed pretty chill and pretty into me. He's a decent-looking guy, and we seemed to click. He had apparently been in a relatively abusive relationship with a woman and was looking to start over. According to him, she had hit him with a frying pan and pepper sprayed him once. He kept going on about how crazy she was. Alright, it happens. We went to the movies this past Friday, and I had a great time. We ended up talking for a few hours, and we hit it off pretty well. I asked about the ex because I was a bit curious as to why he'd stay with someone like that. He didn't say anything positive about her, just that she was crazy, had mental illnesses and didn't take her meds. That kind of stuff. She had tried the baby trap, but had a miscarriage. He expressed relief that she didn't end up with the kid. He said he had felt obligated to her. Again, I get that. In all, I had a good time. Then, morning rolls around, and he tells me that he had hooked up with his ex last night, and that he was going to try and work things out with her. Mildly insulting that I had lost out to an abusive chick, but whatever. I tell him it's cool, and a few hours later, he texted me, saying that she was crazy. He thought she had changed, but she hadn't, and he kept asking to see me. He was being very pushy about wanting to see me today. He begged for 5 minutes of my time so that he could explain to me, and I politely told him I didn't want to be involved with anyone who was so clearly hung up on his ex. This is where it got nuts. He admitted he was still, but that he wanted to see me today so that I could meet her and she could determine if I was better for him than she was, and that she wanted him to be happy because he and I had a connection. I flipped after that and told him that the fact he needed his ex to determine who was right for him was absolutely nuts, and that is not what love is, and that I wanted no part of it. His ex started texting me after that, and it was non-stop insults and incoherent stuff that made no sense. She also dropped the bomb that she was his wife, and I told her to piss off and basically blocked the number. I went on Tinder to message him where I called him a piece of crap, and that if he was intelligent, he should leave her and never message me again. He started to harass me hard, saying that I was miserable because they have a beautiful love together and all this crazy stuff. He then went on to say, "My wife knows where you work. I hope she doesn't do anything too rash." And I told him that if that was a threat, I'd gladly go to the police. He said that she'd been to jail before and she's not afraid, and that she loves him so much she'd mess up anyone and risk the jail time for him, that she'd kill my friends if they tried to protect me, and that she's armed and dangerous. I told him goodbye, reported him and deleted my Tinder account. I did go to the police, but since it wasn't a direct threat, they couldn't do much. The cops think that James was more or less full of crap and just trying to scare me, since some people love getting off on that. He said that I did the right thing by blocking him and reporting him, and that I should just keep my eyes open and alert the people at my job. Scary thing is, James seemed perfectly normal, but he lied about being married, how he felt towards his wife, and he flipped like a switch. His excuse for not being upfront about being married was that they were going to get a divorce. He seemed so docile and unassuming that the hatred and aggressive attitude was insane. I have to honestly wonder, what would have happened if I'd have gone to talk for 5 minutes? I'm kind of concerned, since they do know where I work. But if either of them try anything, the cops will nail them. It was one hell of a weekend. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all of you stopping by for tonight's episode, and hope all is well. So yeah, pretty disturbing. Some crazy ex-boyfriend stories. Perhaps I'll follow this up at some point soon with some crazy ex-girlfriend stories as well, as I've read a rather large number of disturbing stories to do with them too. But let me know as always what you think in the comments. It is always very much appreciated, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to like and subscribe for 4-time-a-week content. It's always pretty good over here. If there are stories that you wish to share, you can always send them to my email or post them on my Reddit page, both of which can be found in the description, so go ahead and check it out. And who knows, you could have your story read on the channel sooner than you think. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to my members and my patrons. You guys are amazing, and it really means a hell of a lot to me that you help me out, so thank you. And if you'd like your name on screen, all that you have to do is chip in a small amount every month, and you get the pleasure, as well as a few cool perks for doing so. Alright then, guys. The baby, we're still waiting for her to be born. We were thinking she was going to be born on Monday, but she didn't come, and she didn't come yesterday, and who knows, she might even come today. We'll see what happens by Friday's video, yeah? Stay safe, everyone. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.